Daniel collapsed beneath the ambulance bay lights, but the German shepherd guarded him before anyone touched him. His shoulder struck the concrete with a dull crack. A dented metal cup rolled from his hand, spinning beneath the red pulse of the exit sign, while Rex planted himself over Daniel's chest. The dog's nails scraped the wet pavement. A warning rose from deep behind his teeth. Through the sliding doors came the sharp scent of disinfectant, warm exhaust from an idling ambulance, and the electronic chorus of an overcrowded emergency department. Emily Carter heard the commotion from tree-off. She had been on staff for 11 days. Long enough to know where the trauma carts were kept, not long enough for anyone to trust her near one. She reached the entrance beside Dr. Gavin Holt, whose white coat remained crisp despite the chaos around him. Daniel lay curled around his abdomen, gray beard pressed against a stained field jacket. Rex wore an old working harness with faded stitching and no civilian service patch. "Sir, can you hear me?" Emily asked, stopping beyond the dog's reach. Daniel's eyelids lifted briefly. His fingers searched the concrete until they touched Rex's front paw. "Stay," he breathed. Holt covered his nose with 2 fingers. "That coat smells like it survived 3 winters in a dumpster." An orderly glanced away. Someone behind the registration desk gave a short laugh, then silenced it when Rex turned his head. Emily watched Daniel instead. His breathing came shallow and uneven. Sweat gleamed along his temple, although cold air poured through the open doors. One boot was split at the sole, but the laces were tied with severe precision. Holt nudged the metal cup aside with his shoe. No visible bleeding. Probably intoxicated, dehydrated, or looking for a warm bed. "His color is wrong," Emily said. Holt's gaze shifted to her new blue badge. "Then this is perfect practice." He pointed toward the least equipped examination bay, separated from the waiting room by a thin curtain. "Let the new nurse handle the homeless veteran and his K9. He gave the word veteran the careless weight of an excuse. "Consider it your orientation." 2 security officers approached with a catch pole and a nylon leash. Rex lowered his body. His ears flattened, and the growl sharpened against the glass doors. Daniel forced one elbow beneath him, trying to rise between the dog and the officers. His arm failed. His face struck the sleeve of his jacket. "Nobody takes him," he rasped. Holt checked the clock above registration. "Remove the animal, clean the patient, run the standard intake. If he refuses, document it and discharge him." Then he turned toward the brighter corridor, where polished wheels rattled over tile and another physician was calling his name. The humiliation remained behind him like an odor. Emily could have followed the order exactly and protected the only position she had managed to rebuild. Instead, she removed her stethoscope, lowered herself onto the cold floor, and placed it where Rex could see both of her empty hands. The shepherd's stare locked onto her. Daniel tightened his fist in the dog's harness. Whatever had brought him down, he was prepared to refuse help rather than lose Rex, and Emily now had seconds to prove she understood why. The old working harness creaked beneath Daniel's fist as 2 security officers edged closer. Fluorescent light washed the intake bay in a hard blue glare, and cold air spilled from the ceiling vents, carrying antiseptic and wet wool. "Touch him, and I walk," Daniel said. The words were weak, but his grip tightened. Rex lowered his head, ears forward, placing his body between Daniel and the approaching hands. Emily stayed on the tile. "Give us room," she told the officers. One glanced toward the corridor where Dr. Holt had disappeared. Doctor ordered the dog removed. "Enforcing him will close the only path to treating the patient." Daniel tried to push himself upright. This time the choice was his: protect Rex and risk leaving without care, or surrender the last thing he trusted. His elbows shook against the floor. A sheen of sweat covered his forehead despite the cold. Emily noticed how carefully he kept his left side turned away, how each breath stopped short before his ribs could fully expand. Rex's attention shifted toward that same side. Not random guarding. Monitoring. Emily slid her stethoscope farther away, then placed her palms flat on her knees. Her voice changed, lower, clipped, stripped of the softness used in civilian exam rooms. "Rex. Platts." The shepherd's ears twitched. Daniel's eyes opened wider. "Bleep." Rex looked at Daniel, waiting. Daniel gave the smallest nod, and the dog folded down beside him, still alert, but no longer blocking Emily. The officers stopped. Those were not pet commands learned in a neighborhood obedience class. They carried the clean rhythm of a military working dog handler. Emily moved only after Rex settled. "I'm not taking him," she said, "but I need your permission to examine you." Daniel studied her face as if searching for a uniform that was no longer there. Then he released one buckle of the harness and laid his hand against Rex's neck. "He stays where I can see him." "Agreed." Emily touched 2 fingers to Daniel's wrist. His pulse fluttered fast and thin. The monitor clipped to his finger, chirped, lost its reading, then caught again. His oxygen level was low, yet there was no wheezing and no obvious injury visible beneath the filthy coat. She pressed lightly near his upper abdomen. Daniel's jaw locked. Rex rose halfway before Emily gave a quiet bleep. The dog held position. Daniel did not. His hand shot out and caught her wrist, not violently, but with startling precision. "Don't," he whispered. Beneath the odor of rain and unwashed fabric, Emily caught the coppery edge of old blood. She looked down. One side of his coat hung heavier than the other, and the fabric near his ribs had dried into a stiff, dark layer. "That is an exposure," she said. Daniel released her and pulled the coat closed. "It's nothing." Emily reached for the trauma shears. "Nothing doesn't make a trained K9 watch your breathing." Rex gave one low whine, his nose fixed on Daniel's hidden side. The monitor chirped faster. Emily met Daniel's eyes and made the decision for both of them. "Rex stays. The coat doesn't." Daniel's fingers remained on the zipper for one strained second, then fell away. As Emily guided the cold metal blades beneath his sleeve, his arm turned under the fluorescent light, and something dark beneath the grime began to emerge. Cold steel whispered through wet wool, each closing bite of the trauma shears sharp beneath the monitor's uneven chirp. Fluorescent light washed the treatment bay in a colorless glare while rain tapped against the ambulance doors beyond the corridor. Emily supported Daniel's forearm and cut toward the inside of his elbow, searching for a vein beneath skin chilled by hours outdoors. Rex remained beside the gurney, leather harness creaking whenever Daniel's breathing caught. "Easy," Emily said, though the word was meant for both of them. Daniel had stopped resisting, but his fingers stayed curled against his palm. The sleeve parted. Grime covered most of his forearm, threaded with old scars and rainwater, yet one black line remained unmistakable beneath it. Emily wiped the skin with an alcohol pad. The antiseptic's clean sting displaced the odors of damp cloth and old blood. A serpent emerged, its narrow body wrapped around the number 9. The shears went still in her hand. For one fractured second, the bay vanished behind heat and rotor thunder. Canvas walls snapped in desert wind. A mortar strike had collapsed one corner of a field aid station, choking the air with dust and burned insulation. Emily remembered gloved hands dragging her beneath a reinforced table. Men with the same mark had held a corridor no evacuation map said could be held. One of them had shoved wounded medics onto the final helicopter while rounds struck the landing pad like metal hail. Raven 9. The unit officially absent from every report she had later been permitted to read. Rex raised his head, his ears angled toward Emily, catching the change in her breathing before Daniel did. Emily placed the shears on the tray instead of letting them fall. The small metallic click sounded too loud. "Where did you get this?" Her voice had lost its bedside softness. Daniel looked at the exposed mark, then at her. The weakness in his face remained, but something behind it sharpened. "Bad decision a long time ago." "No." Emily anchored his arm and slid the 4 catheter into the vein with one controlled motion. Blood flashed into the chamber. She connected the saline line, secured it with tape, and opened the clamp. The intervention changed the room. Daniel was no longer waiting to be processed or removed. He was under active treatment. Rex shifted closer to the gurney, but did not interfere. Emily cleaned the mark once more, revealing a tiny break in the serpent's tail, an authentication detail never printed on insignia, never worn on a uniform. She had seen it only once before, inches from her face, on the wrist of the operator who had carried her through smoke toward the evacuation bird. Daniel followed her gaze. Most people see a snake. Most people weren't at Kestrel Station. The monitor filled the silence between them. Daniel's eyes moved to her hands, to the precise tape lock over the 4, then to the faded pale line crossing her thumb. Recognition did not fully reach his face, but the mask of a confused drifter disappeared. Emily pulled a clean sheet over his exposed arm, shielding the insignia from the corridor. That choice cost her the safety of pretending she had never seen it. Daniel's fingers closed around her wrist, weaker than before, but deliberate. "Who are you?" Footsteps approached outside the curtain, accompanied by Dr. Holt's clipped voice ordering security to clear the bay. Emily did not look toward the sound. She leaned closer, keeping her words beneath the rain and machinery. "Someone Raven 9 brought home." Daniel released her as if the answer had burned him. Beyond the curtain, Holt reached for the rail. Daniel turned his marked arm face down and fixed Emily with a warning that carried more authority than his torn coat or trembling pulse should have allowed. "Then you know why nobody can see that mark." The curtain rings scraped across the metal rail, sharp enough to cut through the hiss of oxygen and the rain hammering the ambulance bay doors. Dr. Gavin Holt entered with 2 security officers behind him, bringing a gust of cold air and the antiseptic bite of wet vinyl. His eyes moved from Rex lying beside the gurney to the 4 line in Daniel's arm. "I ordered this bay cleared." Emily stood between Holt and the sheet covering Daniel's marked forearm. The monitor cast a green pulse across her face. "His pressure is 86/54. Heart rate 130. Oxygen saturation is falling." Holt pressed 2 fingers to Daniel's wrist, then withdrew them as Daniel's coat released the sour odor of rain, sweat, and old blood. "Or he's dehydrated, intoxicated, and looking for a bed." He glanced at the security officers. "Remove the dog. Discontinue the line. Discharge him when he can stand." Rex lifted his head at the change in voices. Daniel's breathing shortened, each inhale catching beneath his left ribs. Emily checked the 4-chamber, opened the flow, and reached for the trauma phone. Holt caught the handset before she could lift it. "You are on your first week, Nurse Carter. You do not activate a trauma response because a stray dog makes you nervous." Emily looked past him to the pale skin around Daniel's mouth. "The dog isn't making me nervous." Rainwater ticked from Holt's sleeve onto the linoleum. "Then follow the order." The safest answer waited on her tongue. "Yes, doctor." It would preserve her probationary position, her references, and the civilian life she had spent years building. Beneath the sheet, Daniel rotated his arm farther inward, protecting the Raven 9 mark even as his fingers began to tremble. Emily stepped to the wall panel and pressed the red trauma activation button. A hard tone sounded overhead. White lights flooded the bay, and the quiet corridor erupted with approaching wheels, cabinet doors, and running shoes. "Adult trauma activation," Emily said into the intercom. "Unstable patient. Suspected occult thoracic injury." Holt's face tightened. "Cancel it." "No." The single word landed beneath the alarm. Emily entered Daniel's blood pressure, oxygen level, concealed bleeding, and altered respiratory pattern into the chart, placing her name and license number beneath the escalation. Holt leaned close enough that she smelled coffee on his breath. "If this is an unnecessary activation, I will file for immediate suspension of your clinical privileges." Emily removed her badge, set it beside Daniel's rain-darkened coat, and met his stare. "Then file it after he survives." The trauma team pushed through the curtain, forcing security back. Rex remained beside the gurney, rigid but silent, while Daniel's monitor gave a sudden, uneven stutter. Holt pointed toward the door. "You have until the attending arrives to prove this man belongs in a trauma bay." Emily pulled on fresh gloves as the clock above the sink clicked forward. Her license now lay on the steel counter, and Daniel's hidden mark lay inches from discovery. "Get blood ready," she ordered. "He isn't leaving." A low growl rolled beneath the monitor's uneven beeping, too controlled to be aggression and too urgent to ignore. Rex had risen beside the gurney, his nails clicking against the cold tile as he pressed his nose toward Daniel's left ribs. Emily followed the dog's stare. The veteran's eyelids opened under the hard fluorescent light, and his fingers closed weakly around the sheet hiding the serpent and the number 9. "Easy," Emily said, keeping one gloved hand near his shoulder. Daniel looked past the trauma team, past Holt, and fixed on her face. His breathing caught. "Sparrow." The name left him as little more than air. Emily went still. No one at Kestrel Station had used that field nickname outside the evacuation corridor. Holt stepped closer. "What did he call you?" Daniel's grip tightened, dragging the sheet higher over his arm. "Nothing." His gaze returned to Emily. "You keep my name out of their systems. The unit too. You understand." Emily lowered her voice beneath the hiss of oxygen. Your heart rhythm is changing. I can protect your privacy, but I can't treat what you refuse to tell me. Then don't treat it. Daniel turned his head toward Rex. The shepherd's ears were pinned forward, his body taut beside the rail. They see that mark, they start digging. I buried enough people because of what it means. A nurse reached for the blood pressure cuff, but Daniel pulled his arm away and the monitor leads tugged across his chest. This was no longer Holt forcing a discharge or Emily defending an activation. Daniel himself was closing the only door she had opened. Emily removed her hand from the sheet. I won't expose Raven 9 without your consent, she said. But silence is now your decision, not mine. Rex may have to watch it kill you. Daniel's eyes shifted to the dog. For 1 second, the room held only the ventilator cart's soft hum and rain tapping the narrow window. Rex suddenly stood, struck the mattress once with his forepaw, then shoved his muzzle beneath Daniel's wrist. The monitor still showed the same irregular rhythm. Emily watched Rex repeat the motion, paw, wrist, left chest, before the machine gave a sharper alarm. Daniel's face lost what little color remained. He alerts before the episodes, Emily said. What is he detecting? Daniel tried to inhale, but the breath stopped halfway. Rex whined once, a thin sound that cut through the bay. Daniel reached down and threaded 2 trembling fingers into the shepherd's damp fur. When he spoke again, the choice was his. Metal fragment, he whispered. Old mission injury. It was stable for years. Holt's expression tightened. Where? Daniel looked directly at Emily, surrendering the secret he had protected even while collapsing outside the hospital. It moved after I fell 3 nights ago. I can feel it when my heart skips. Emily leaned closer. How near the heart? Daniel swallowed, his fingertips still locked in Rex's coat. Last field scan put it behind the left ribs, less than an inch from the pericardium. The cardiac alarm accelerated before anyone answered. Daniel's grip slipped from Rex, and the dog drove his shoulder against the gurney rail as if trying to hold him in the room. Emily reached for the oxygen mask while Holt stared at the concealed arm and then at the failing rhythm. Daniel had finally broken his silence. Now they had to locate a moving fragment beside his heart without exposing the identity he had ordered Sparrow to protect. Cold fluorescent light swept across the bay as the trauma coordinator pressed a secure handset to her ear. The line answered with a burst of static, then a clipped voice requested the identifying detail beneath Daniel's sheet. Emily kept one hand over the concealed mark and looked at him. Verification only. Nothing leaves this room without your consent. Daniel's breathing scraped against the oxygen mask. After a long moment, he turned his arm upward. Emily uncovered the serpent wrapped around the number 9 and read the faded field code beneath its broken tail. Holt stood beside the monitor, silent now, while rain hammered the dark windows and antiseptic stung the overheated air. The coordinator repeated the code into the handset. A keyboard rattled at the other end. Then came a single electronic tone. Identity confirmed. Daniel Mercer, Raven 9 Pathfinder. Restricted medical access authorized. The words changed the room more completely than any rank could have. Daniel was not an intoxicated drifter seeking a warm bed. He was the man who had held the Kestrel evacuation corridor after its eastern route collapsed. The secure voice continued, each sentence spare and official. 13 personnel had crossed because Daniel remained behind to guide them through smoke, failed communications, and incoming fire. His extraction window had closed while he held the route. By the time recovery reached him, the fragment near his heart was only one entry on a much longer casualty report. Emily watched Daniel's fingers tighten around the edge of the blanket. That record leaves something out, he said. His voice was thin, but it stopped the coordinator. I had orders to board the final aircraft. The oxygen mask clouded, cleared, then clouded again. I gave my seat to the last medic. Emily remembered that aircraft. The hot metal floor, rotor thunder pressing against her ribs, gloved hands dragging her aboard, while someone on the ground turned back into the dust. Sparrow had survived because Daniel had chosen not to leave. The record listed what followed without ceremony. Prolonged rehabilitation, medical separation, missed hearings, a marriage dissolved during recovery, and no permanent address after his benefits case lapsed. Daniel had traded more than an extraction seat. He had surrendered the future waiting beyond it. Rex rose suddenly and placed both front paws against the gurney. His worn service collar shifted beneath the harsh light, exposing a small brass plate Emily had not noticed. The name stamped there was not Daniel's. Mason Cole, she read. Daniel closed his eyes. His handler. My last man in the corridor. After Cole died during the evacuation, Rex had refused reassignment. Daniel had taken the shepherd home, and when the home disappeared, the dog remained. Rex was not evidence of Daniel's former life. He was the last living bond to the man Daniel had failed to bring back. Holt slowly dismissed security with a motion toward the door. Boots receded over polished tile, and the bay grew quiet except for rain, oxygen, and Rex's nails against the rail. The secure voice returned with a harder edge. The complete surgical file is sealed above hospital clearance. Access requires authorization from a surviving Raven 9 medical officer. Holt looked toward Emily. The monitor skipped a beat. Daniel opened his eyes and found hers. Sparrow, he whispered, if you open that record, they'll know you're alive. A red warning light began pulsing across the steel cabinet as the secure line announced the deadline. Authorization required within 4 minutes. Thunder struck close enough to rattle the steel cabinet, and every monitor in the bay blinked black. Emergency lights returned in a dim red wash, but the diagnostic console remained dead, its cooling fan winding down beneath the hard hiss of oxygen. Daniel's blood pressure vanished from the screen before the backup monitor caught it. 68/40. Rex surged upright, whining low in his chest. Emily reached Daniel as his skin turned cold beneath her fingers and his pulse thinned into a rapid flutter. He's obstructing, she said. Holt glanced toward the disabled scanner. We can't confirm that. Then stop waiting for a machine. Emily stripped away the sheet and traced the old injury from Daniel's left flank toward the space below his sternum. Her fingertips paused over a patch of rigid scar tissue. One side of his chest rose less than the other. His neck veins stood out despite the collapsing pressure, and each breath ended with a faint, wet catch. The storm had taken their imaging, not the map written across his body. The fragment entered low, deflected off a rib, and migrated upward, she said. His fall shifted it toward the sac around the heart. Pressure is building faster than he can compensate. Another thunderclap rolled over the roof. Daniel's rhythm broke into a jagged run, and Rex struck the mattress with both front paws. Emily turned to the trauma team. 2 units of warmed blood. Pressure infusion, not wide-open crystalloid. High-flow oxygen. Keep him tilted 10 degrees right. Holt blocked the cart. That position isn't standard. Emily seized a folded blanket and wedged it beneath Daniel's left side. It was at Kestrel. The fragment moves with the scar channel. Flat on his back, it presses inward. Daniel's eyelids lifted a fraction. Corridor hold, he breathed. The phrase landed like an order remembered by muscle. Emily placed 2 fingers below the scar and directed the senior nurse to apply steady counterpressure along the rib margin while Holt guided bedside ultrasound from the only battery-powered unit still working. Grainy gray shadows crawled across its small screen. Angled toward the right shoulder, Emily told him. You're looking from the wrong battlefield. Holt changed the probe angle. A dark crescent appeared around the heart. His jaw tightened. Pericardial fluid. And the fragments at the inferior edge, Emily said. Prepare for immediate decompression, but don't chase it. Stabilize the pressure first. Holt began the procedure while Emily controlled Daniel's position and called each change in rhythm before the monitor alarmed. The first unit of blood flowed through the warmer, carrying a faint metallic smell into the chilled bay. Seconds later, Daniel's pulse strengthened beneath her hand. His pressure climbed to 82/50, then 90/56. Rex lowered his head onto Daniel's wrist, no longer striking the rail. The room had stopped looking at Emily as the new nurse. Every face waited for her next instruction. Holt removed his gloves, rainwater trembling against the windows behind him. You were right about the trajectory, he said. The secure terminal flickered back to life, and the authorization clock returned with 41 seconds remaining. Emily looked from Daniel's steadier rhythm to the sealed record glowing red on the screen. Holt stepped away from the console. This is your call now, Sparrow. Daniel had survived the storm's first blow. Saving him in surgery would require Emily to erase her own disappearance. The authorization clock burned red against the terminal glass. 38 seconds. Rain hissed across the dark windows. while the blood warmer clicked beside Daniel's bed and pushed dry metallic heat into the chilled trauma bay. Holt looked at the steadier pulse on the monitor, then removed his access card from his coat. "I misjudged him," he said, his voice carrying above the generator's low vibration. "And I misjudged you." He placed the card beside Emily's hand. "You have clinical command. Open what the surgical team needs." 31 seconds. Emily glanced toward Daniel. His skin remained gray beneath the fluorescent light, but his fingers had curled into Rex's coarse neck fur. The German shepherd watched her without moving, one ear angled toward the monitor. Daniel had asked her to protect the life he had buried. Now that secrecy stood between him and the operating room. The trauma coordinator moved to the terminal. "Authorization will transmit your identity to Defense Medical Command. Full name, license number, former status. Once submitted, there's no local override." Emily pulled her hospital badge from her scrub pocket. The plastic edge was warm from her body. The photograph showed a woman with an ordinary name and no visible history. She laid it beside Holt's card. "Emily Carter, RN," she said. "License number 614829. Record me as the requesting clinician." Holt's jaw tightened. "You understand this could trigger a federal review." "It will. Your employment could be frozen before sunrise. Then file whatever you have to file after he survives." 22 seconds. Daniel's eyes opened to narrow slits. "Sparrow." The name came out beneath the oxygen mask as little more than breath against plastic. Emily stepped to his side, the floor cold through her shoes where stormwater had tracked in from the ambulance entrance. "You gave up your seat at Kestrel," she told him. "I'm giving up a hiding place. That's not the same price." His grip loosened from Rex's fur. For 1 second, his hand hovered between them. Then he pressed 2 fingers against her wrist, the old field signal for proceed. Daniel had made his choice. Emily turned before anyone could answer for him. She entered her license number, placed her thumb on the scanner, and spoke clearly into the verification microphone. "Medical officer call sign Sparrow. Raven 9 survivor authentication. Release Daniel Mercer's surgical file." The terminal emitted a hard electronic tone. A line of white light passed beneath her thumb, cold enough to sting. "Access granted" replaced the sealed record warning, and anatomical scans unfolded across the screen. The fragment's exact composition, its original entry angle, vascular damage from Kestrel Station, and the operative restrictions the surgeons had been missing. The trauma coordinator transmitted the file upstairs. "Or 2 confirms receipt. Cardiothoracic surgery is ready." Rex exhaled and rested his muzzle against Daniel's forearm, directly below the concealed mark. The authorization clock vanished, but another message appeared in its place. "Surviving officer status restored. Emily Carter, Sparrow." Notifications began populating beneath it, each accompanied by the sharp chime of an outside agency receiving confirmation. Holt stared at the screen, then at the nurse he had treated as expendable less than an hour earlier. Without hesitation, he stepped away from the head of the bed and opened the route to the operating elevator. "Coordinator Carter," he said, giving the authority back in front of the entire team. "Take him up." The wheels struck the threshold with a metallic jolt. Emily walked beside Daniel while Rex kept pace at the rail, his tags whispering against his collar. Behind them, the terminal issued one final tone. Someone beyond the hospital now knew Sparrow was alive and had already requested immediate contact. Cold white light swept across the operating elevator as the doors opened, carrying the antiseptic bite of the surgical floor. Before the team could move Daniel through, Rex planted himself beside the gurney and pressed his muzzle against Daniel's concealed forearm. Daniel's fingers found the dog's collar. "Let him see it, Sparrow." Emily stopped. Daniel pulled the cut sleeve above his elbow, exposing the serpent wound around the number 9. Holt lowered his eyes, but Daniel looked directly at Emily. "You recognize the mark," he said, his voice rough beneath the oxygen mask. "You still don't know what it means." He lifted his arm toward Rex. The shepherd touched his nose to the faded ink and remained perfectly still. "It wasn't a badge for the men who came home. Mason designed it for the people we promised not to leave behind." The mark had never named Raven 9's deadliest soldiers. It named their duty. At Kestrel Station, Daniel had surrendered his seat because Emily was wounded and 13 lives still waited beyond the corridor. Years later, Emily had risked her license and surrendered her anonymity for the same reason. One forgotten man was still waiting at the edge of care. Daniel reached for her hand and turned her wrist upward. No tattoo showed there, only a pale scar crossing the pulse point. "You don't need the ink," he whispered. "You kept the promise." Rex released one low breath. His tags clicked against the steel rail as the surgical team rolled Daniel forward. The operating room doors closed with a rubber-edged thud, leaving Emily beneath the blue indicator light. The requested contact reached the wall phone seconds later. She answered to a clipped military voice offering immediate reinstatement, protected status, and command authority over a newly restored Raven 9 medical program. Emily listened while rain drummed against the distant windows. Then she looked through the glass at Rex, lying outside the operating suite with his head between his paws. "Restore the names of the 13, she said. "Keep my rank." She ended the call and sat beside the dog. 3 hours later, the doors opened. Warm air carried the faint smell of cautery and sterile linen. Holt removed his surgical cap, the mockery gone from his face. "The fragment is out. He's stable." When Daniel emerged, Rex rose, but waited for Emily's nod before approaching. The dog placed both front paws against the gurney rail, and Daniel buried his hand in the thick fur at his neck. Holt stepped closer. "Mr. Mercer, I failed you before I examined you." Daniel studied him, then extended the marked arm, not as proof, but as terms. "Next time, believe the patient before you believe his coat." Holt accepted his hand. At dawn, amber light filled the recovery room. Daniel allowed Emily to cover the mark again, but not before he asked her to photograph it for the restored memorial record beside Mason Cole's name. The symbol would remain hidden from strangers, yet its meaning would no longer be buried. Emily fastened Rex's collar. Daniel rested his hand over hers, and the three of them listened as the storm moved east. Raven 9 had never been a mark worn by the Chosen. It was the promise that no forgotten life would ever be treated as disposable again.